All right, y'all. We've had a lot of great talks already tonight. I have one more for you. As promised, apparently I'm going to add tools to a potentially broken MCP server. We'll fix that. Don't worry. You'll be able to submit talks. I have everything running locally, so hopefully we'll be fine here. But as I mentioned at the beginning, when we started this community, we really wanted to build something that y'all could use and that will grow along with you. So we started at first with a really simple idea here that just you would be able to, submit talks, get your talks, and see what kind of things people are proposing to talk about. This is where it started, and that's all there is to it. We're going to add another tool to it tonight. Hermes did not successfully submit a talk, but we'll see what's going on with that and get that up to date for you so that you can. Now, before we get into actually building out the next tool that I want to show you how to build, I want to show you a little bit about how I did kind of the MVP of this. And this was like a weekend idea, by the way. So this is where I started with it. We're going to evolve it. You'll see it grow over the course of coming to these different events. Let's start with here. Let's start with this. This here, and I need to zoom in a little bit. I'm so used to having a mouse that as soon as I don't anymore, I can't function. But hold on, I want to go over here. All right, so this is a REST connector, and so where I started with this is Supabase. Whenever I'm doing like a kind of POC and I just want to see if something works real quick, we kind of always have we have those tools that we reach for. I almost always end up reaching for Supabase for a couple of reasons. It's just kind of easy to spin up a project, but in this case, I also really wanted a database that exposed REST APIs without me having to do anything. So I used Supabase because I wanted to be able to expose REST resources directly to GraphQL. Yeah, I know. It's because I'm using the Zoom. I wanted to be able to expose REST resources directly to GraphQL. So that's what this is. We'll get into that a little more later because this is the schema that I'm going to be exposing this other tool from. In addition to this, I had some custom logic that I wanted. So I had some resources that I wasn't going to be able to use directly. So for those, I want to show you this. I'm not going to get too far into this, but what this is just, this is Apollo Server. And I used, again, MVP. So it's JavaScript. I should have started with TypeScript because now this is a living, breathing thing, and I'm going to keep, building it out. So I might be changing that. But basically what Apollo Server allows you to do is wrap whatever you're doing and expose it into a GraphQL schema, which is what I wanted to do because I'm exposing all of this to the Apollo MCP server to be able to then expose those tools. So I wanted the REST connector and this to be able to talk to each other. Now, you might be saying oh, well, this doesn't really work for me because I do not use JavaScript or TypeScript or anything. We have a bunch of templates for Apollo Server. So really, any language that you're working in, if you want to use the Apollo MCP server, so you need a GraphQL API, you can work in whatever language you want. We have templates to get you up and running with that, so it's super easy to do that. And to access those, we have a Rover is our CLI for working with GraphQL, and it's just a really nice dev experience, but this is under Rover templates. All right, now let's actually get into the details of this connectors endpoint. So again, connectors is for exposing REST APIs directly to GraphQL. You don't really have to do much. What you do, we're going to walk through the parts that are going to be important to you for what we're about to show. You point to your base URL, whatever that is. That's your main source. Then you're going to define the types that are important to you. What we're going to expose is events. So that's all the events from Luma, because it's not a great experience right now to use this tool because you'd have to look at all the talks, think about that. Then you'd have to go to Luma and be are there any events? And then you'd go to maybe find out if we had some sessions from previous speakers. So we want to pull that all into the tool so you can just work from Claude or wherever you are. So we're going to expose the events. So what you're seeing here is that we've made a type for event with all the fields that we're interested in here. And the most interesting part to me, and some other folks have brought this up this evening, is that kind of API orchestration under the hood is really important. And in our case, we want the sessions to always be returned on the event. So instead of having to manage those two APIs separately, because my sessions database in Supabase, that table is a separate API. So I don't have to write any code to do that. I'm just going to expose that with the event. So when there are sessions that have already happened, speaking sessions, that they'll get returned. So that's really cool because I won't have to make separate tool calls for that or write any like code that I need to maintain. So we're going to go a little bit further down here. You can ignore most of this because what we're going to focus on for tonight is get events. So this is the main get events call. You'll notice that those sessions aren't here in those fields for what I'm selecting, but it doesn't matter because we've defined that sessions are available on that type. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. So this is what a connector looks like. You define the types you want, you define the queries you want, mutations you want. If you're not familiar with that word, it's just, anytime you're transforming the data. So writing to the database or changing anything about it. And that's when you're going to be using resources directly and don't need to write any custom code around it. So it's super convenient. All right, but let's go to, I have this running already. Actually, let me show you. Come back. Let me show you. I have this running already because I wanted to show you Claude before, but let me just show you actually kind of what makes it run in the background. That's probably going to be super important to you if you want to try it out. So you'll have an MCP config, and there's some defaults that will run if you just use certain flags, but you can also like override everything. And so right now we're just saying that we want you to be able to access the mutations to actually submit and edit your talks. And we're using streamable HTTP. So this is a pretty basic, but there's a lot more configurations you can put here. The supergraph is a little interesting here too, because what you're going to see here is that custom endpoint I wrote is being fed into this supergraph schema. So these are two different subgraphs that now can work together. They can talk to each other. They exist in one place. That's all you really need to know about that. And then the router is just going to feed in any of my environment keys. In this case, it's just an anonymous key for Supabase. So we're running that. And now we're going to actually design the tool. Let me see for this. If we can just make this. Nope, wrong one. There we go. All right. So this right here is the Apollo sandbox. This is not specific to MCP. This is just part of your dev environment. This is where you can test all your queries, your mutations. There's some really nice debugging tools here when things go wrong. Luckily, we certainly won't have to see any of those today. So I'm not super interested in any of these other things going on here. You can see also back here, here's all the mutations for submitting and updating. We're adding a new query though. We're adding get events. So to get started, let's just add everything that's available to me. Here's all those sessions and everything available in it. Now, I guess we should make sure that works. Okay, so these are all the events that we have in the server right now. And if it's a past event, the sessions are there. Now, this query works, but we want it to be an MCP tool, right? And this is a terrible MCP tool right now. It is, your LLM wouldn't know what to do with this. And let's go through some of the best practices here. One of the main things that you have to think about when designing your MCP tools is management of your context window. You need to think about how much information you're giving the LLM, too much, and it might get confused and distracted by data that you may be provided to it. Like say you have a REST API endpoint and you just dumped all of that response into the context window instead of picking and choosing what you're setting up there. That can cause your LLM to hallucinate because it starts to get like, I don't know if you've ever had a really long conversation in one window and then you realize like the conversation starts going off the rails and you realize that like LLMs, at least at this point, and this could change, like everything seems to change weekly right now, they don't seem to be really good at long conversations. They'll start to pick, maybe they're good at the beginning and they're good at the end, but then stuff in the middle gets muddy. So you don't want to fill up a context window with your tools. The other thing is, so that has to do with like the amount of fields you're returning. The other thing is just making sure that everything is a name that makes sense. So notice in get events, we have an ID. In sessions, we have an ID. In sessions, I also have an event ID. ID means something to me in this context, but not necessarily to the LLM. So one thing you can do is just alias it to something more meaningful. And that gives your LLM context because it now reads, oh, this is an event ID. Then you look through and say, well, what do I want to leave? You could say all these: event location, event date, event URL. You can do whatever you want. I'm not going to go through and do every single one right now. The other thing you want to do that's really easy with GraphQL is that I can say, I don't want all of this back from my API. I don't nobody needs a session ID. We already have event ID in the top level call. And I know that it is really rare that people add their slides in their code. So I'm just going to like bring this down into just as much information as our users and our agent users, because you have to think about both now, need. So that's one thing you can do to provide better context, is make sure you only provide the fields that are really needed by your end user and your agent user, and then make sure they're meaningfully named. So alias all of those fields to things that make sense. Next thing, and this is like pretty obvious, example query is the most useless query name that you could have. No one knows what that means. And what you should do here is like, I think sometimes, and I don't know, I think about this, like, I'm like, oh, I don't want to make something really long and wordy in my query name, but that's actually really useful here. So I want this to say like every single word about what this does. So I'm going to make it get all events with speaking sessions. And like, that's really verbose, right? But it's super useful because now the LLM can actually read this. It provides context without me having to do anything. The last place you can add it in here is a description at the top. And a few things with the descriptions, again, be really specific. And this query doesn't pass parameters, but if it does, you should always really explicitly say like what variables, what has to be passed, like if there's any kind of restrictions on that. You can also add like placeholder ones if you want to, that'll always be passed. So we're going to add a nice description here that says this query gets all events for the MCP server builder series, and for past events returns all speaker sessions. So that's a much better looking tool than we started with. We could have saved that first version, but we probably wouldn't have gotten the results that we wanted, or at least the closest to the results that we wanted. As was brought up in the very first talk, there's always still a bit of unknown because you can't control everything that the LLM might do with this either. Now, to turn this into an MCP tool, there's nothing else that I really need to do here except save this. So we're going to save this operation. I'm saving it to, this is where I want to be. I'm going to save it into my default tool set. And that's it. That is now an MCP tool. In your sandbox, if you want to see what you have available, they're in the second little tab over. And you can see the 3 that we started with, and then now our get all events one. So you can update these here, save them, and then they're ready to go. What's really cool, and before we go back to Claude, I have to zoom in on this. Hold on. Okay. Nope, wrong. You can see down here where it was hot reloaded, and now our tool is also already loaded into the MCP server. So we are ready to go here. So that's great. We know our tool's here. We're successful. We have no errors. Now we need to quit Claude and reopen it because Claude does not have a hot reloading experience. So you always have to turn it off and turn it back on. Unfortunately, shift back in. No, I keep shifting. There we go. So Claude should have our new tool now. So we see get all events. Okay, cool. So now, because this server can do more than one thing, you don't just submit and manage your own talks anymore. Now you can get information about previous talks. So that means I can ask like a more interesting question. So say like I'm interested in submitting to this series, but I don't really know a lot about it. Maybe somebody told me about it. I can say I built community. Oh my gosh, I can't type in front of you guys. MCP server, and I want to get accepted to talk at the MCP Builder series. Help me design my abstract so that it has the highest likelihood of getting accepted. All right, let's see what it does. Hopefully it does what I want it to. All right, it's getting on the talk proposals. That's something I would want it to do, is do a little research for me. See if it gets our, oh, it got our new tool too. And what's really cool about that to me is I didn't have to tell it exactly what tools to use. Now, would it always make the right choices? I don't know. But I think it's pretty cool that we provided enough context, at least in this kind of basic test. We're like, okay, we know that it's likely to know what I'm talking about, but again, can't control what my users are going to put into Claude. And we can't control Claude directly, but we do the best we can right now. So it's done. It went pretty snappy, which is nice. So it's saying this is what this community kind of demo wants. They want technical demos. It's giving me an idea for this and an abstract template to make me stand out. So yeah, it did exactly what I wanted it to do, and it gave me a good idea. Now I can go through and then actually submit. So the takeaway from this is this Apollo MCP server is for exposing GraphQL as tools. So if you already have a GraphQL API, like you're ready to go, this is easy to layer on top. If you don't, but you're interested in trying it, Apollo server, look for the templates, Rover template list. If you're in Python, you're in Java, whatever you're working in, you can wrap a GraphQL, you can expose your code as a GraphQL API and test it out that way. And if you have an existing REST resource, you want to use connectors, and that's the easiest way to get started with this today. So that's all from me. Everything worked. I had no errors, guys. That's super exciting.